I think there's a part in all of us that yearns for the epic. It begins with the unfettered dreams of childhood to be an astronaut, a rock star, a knight. Those dreams morph and change to our shifting fancies and then ultimately fade beneath grim reality. How quickly and how deeply that yearning is broken depends upon our individual circumstances and our capacities to cope with what we face in our lives. A few of us actually achieve what we long for, but that achievement is always born out of intense commitment, and sometimes it isn't worth it. Hi, my name is Jonathan Oldenburg. I am the author of Tears from Iron, the first in a series called Memories of the Cataclysm, now available on audiobook. In this video, we're going to be looking at where this yearning for the epic comes from. We've already talked about it a little bit, why it's important, how it grows, how it evolves. Ultimately, in the face of our reality, how it stands up in the face of things like death and loss. Ultimately, if you haven't been able to figure out the tone already, this is a rejection of modern nihilism and hopelessness and an appeal to a different form of fantasy literature, perhaps a rebirth, if you will. Okay, so let's get started. In the introduction, I posited a theory on where this yearning for the epic comes from. It comes from our childhood and those innocent dreams before reality hits us. And this isn't to say that our lives aren't important once we face that grim reality. They can be quite good, and we may find ourselves content. Sure, we may not be the astronaut striding across the face of Mars. We may not be a rock star dancing around and singing to the adulations of masses of people. We may not be a knight fighting a dragon. Maybe we're a construction worker pouring concrete for a new road, a delivery driver bringing packages to people who need them, somebody flipping burgers at a fast food joint, or a white-collar worker stuck behind a desk in a humdrum reality. This isn't glamorous, but it's important. The construction worker and his roads provides the transit by which our economy, our lives, our means of seeing each other and visiting and traveling and exploring are still available. Food sustains our survival, and the convivial atmosphere in a restaurant can sustain our friendships, which are also important to our human existence. And that blue-collar worker pushing the papers, or these days typing in their computer, that's an interconnectivity of our modern world. Ultimately, it's work. We work because that's what we need to do to sustain our way of life. They call it work for a reason, and we have accepted that. So even if we found a certain contentment in our lives and that yearning has died away, perhaps it probably still continues to exist in the smaller facets that maybe we aren't even aware of. We seek that sense when we watch our favorite sports team clobber their foes, jumping up and down as a player crosses the end zone and screaming as if we had been a part of that accomplishment. Or watching action-packed movie part 27 as we revel with the hero in his great epic moments. Sometimes we step into them playing the hero in our favorite computer games, or board games, or role-playing games. It may reverberate through us in our choice of music. We feel it in our stories. For it is in stories where we can sense that great epicness, where in our own lives those truly epic moments feel more mundane. Let me give a story which sort of captures this idea of reality not living up to our expectations. During the second summer at the United States Military Academy at West Point, all sophomores, we call them yearlings, spend a period of time experiencing all the branches of the Army. One of these is called Infantry Week, where you live the life of a light infantryman in a combat situation in the dense forest. And basically you spend the entire week awake, eating mediocre food at best, no shelter, largely spent looking down the barrel of your weapon for a potential ambush and in on occasional patrols. And after the experience, I was talking with a friend of mine, and he was commenting that during one of those combat exercises, as he was running through the forest, he realized something was lacking. There was no soundtrack. And that made me laugh, but I think that's the truth of it. You know, in those exciting moments that we think about when we watch a movie, when we read a book, in reality, the hero is at best miserable. They're probably angry, afraid, filled with all sorts of those not pleasant emotions that we would rather not face. It's much easier for us to curl up in front of a fire under a warm blanket with a cup of cocoa and read about these epic adventures than to actually experience them. That is why dreams remain dreams and reality is reality. The yearning for the epic is this gilded vision where pain and sorrow are always sweet, not like the world in which we live. Yet I believe there is value in this yearning. It serves as an outlet for hope. It provides worlds of wonderment that lie beyond our true reach, where, if only for a moment, we can claim them for our own to the relief of the harder reality that surrounds us. And in the words of G.K. Chesterton, fairy tales do not tell children that dragons exist. Children already know the dragons exist. Fairy tales tell children that the dragons can be killed. And by dragons, he doesn't mean dragons. Hope is the crux of it. For while we may never walk on Mars, we can still see a better tomorrow, and the yearning of that hope gives us the strength to reach for it. This idea is rejected oftentimes in modern fantasy that likes to bathe in nihilism, hopelessness, cynicism, and a bitter reality where there are no heroes, where all the ones who would be heroes are actually corrupt sellouts, and those fools who truly strive for it end up corrupted and more evil than all the rest, or they end up dead, often facing arbitrary, meaningless, empty demises that are as empty as their noble aspirations. Hardship and loss are important in stories. They are a part of our existence, and it is the exploration of that tragedy that I think gives tales the potential for their greatest meaning. Death is also important for stories. It is not something that should be avoided. While my descriptions in this video so far may sound rosy, I am far from gentle with my characters. I put them through brutal challenges and hard moral quandaries. I kill off quite a few of them, in fact. If you look at the list of characters from Tears from Iron, for example, 1/3 of them don't survive to see the ending. The key isn't death, it's how we handle death. So let's take a deeper look at this. Modern society is obsessed with death. Our lives are longer and healthier than anyone before us. Back in the Middle Ages, the life expectancy was about 30 years. Infant mortality rate was estimated somewhere between 25 to 30% in the first year, and essentially half of all children weren't expected to make it through to adulthood. Certainly COVID took many lives, and I grieve with everyone who lost someone during that pandemic. But as a species, it killed less than 0.1% of our entire population. Compare that to the Black Death, which killed 30 to 50% of the regions it afflicted. Thus it seems that the longer and the greater the quality of our lives, the more reluctant we are to part with them. Cynicism, despair, even suicide are on the rise. With that in mind, why do we find a yearning for those epic tales of the greatest of all deaths, the last stand? Thermopylae, the Masada, the Alamo, Rorke's Drift, the Warsaw Uprising. These have all captured our imaginations. Or if you prefer, the Seven Samurai, the Magnificent Seven, the Last Samurai, the 300, Logan, Saving Private Ryan, Black Hawk Down. The list goes on. Those stories are some of the blockbusters in the movie industry, and they also rise up on many reading and top sellers lists. Regardless of how one might feel about the political or socioeconomic factors which led to these last stands, or the deeper motivations that brought around such conflicts, sometimes often dour and dark and of questionable morality, we are drawn to these final stands because of the epic tragedy found in such valor, that standing side by side with your brothers against the grim reality that there is no coming back, clinging to courage against failing hope, and often paying that ultimate sacrifice. I'm not referring to self-immolation such as Hitler's suicide. He matched a life of tyranny and oppression with his death. As he prepared to kill himself, Hitler cursed his own German people, wishing annihilation upon them because they had been insufficient to achieve his vision. True acts of heroic self-sacrifice are never about abandoning others and forcing them to pay the price for the problems you created. Nor am I referring to the suicide bomber whose purpose is to inflict pain and suffering and terror. On the contrary, I'm talking about those individuals standing up and choosing to pay that ultimate price for the dream of a better tomorrow. In this, there is triumph over tyranny. There is triumph over all those bleak emotions seeking to drag us down. In history, these last stands usually center around a group of defenders, but in fantasy and sci-fi, it often focuses on the individual. Tolkien is thick with such accounts, from Glorfindel's epic battle against the Balrog during the fall of Gondolin in the Silmarillion, to the last stand of Boromir on Amon Hen, and of course the gallantry of Éowyn and Meriadoc as they stand against the Witch King of Angmar on the fields of Pelennor. As for sci-fi, this idea is probably best personified in Star Trek II with the sacrificial death of Spock to save the Starship Enterprise. This brings me to 2 points. First, these martyrs didn't want to die. It wasn't suicide. Nor were they driven by wrath or hatred. Being human, they were all imperfect, but the motivations behind their valiant stands comprise concepts like brotherhood, love of homeland, and service to a higher duty. They didn't die to inflict terror or pain on others, though such acts to a degree are inevitable in any battle, but rather to serve and love and protect. They didn't set out to die, but they didn't shirk from that path when it lay before them. An exception may be Éowyn, but even her faith spirit was driven by despondency and not by a yearning for martyrdom. Second, this path, both in stories and in reality, are not ones that anyone in their right mind would yearn for. Even setting aside death, the life of a warrior is a hard one. When you're not bored, you're overworked, and that's only in peacetime. In war, you're not only cold and hungry, but you're afraid with all of your tomorrows in perpetual doubt. Like the missing soundtrack I mentioned above, there is no booming crescendo, no roar of the orchestra to bolster your courage. There is no audience clinging to the edge of their seats, intense anticipation of this certain and ultimate triumph. For that matter, there is no certainty that anyone will know of your deeds, the triumphs you've claimed, the sufferings you've endured, and the courage you've found in those final moments. Thus, we can be grateful that so few of us are called upon to take this final epic challenge. We have no Dark Lord to defy, no horde to hold back with our last grasp, no grenade that we have to leap on to save our brothers. After all, the hero who leaps on the grenade doesn't see the happy ending. As often as not, they can't even be certain that the life they're selling so dearly won't lead to a happy ending for those they've left behind. Why then do we thrive on these scenes of such epic valor and sacrifice? Why do we claim these moments as the greatest parts of our stories, where our hearts leap up in battle cry? I think it's because in these moments we see beyond ourselves. Surprisingly, an author known largely for his comedic fantasy, Stephen Brust, I think captured this most succinctly. It's in his book The Paths of the Dead, where Tevna, the pyrologist, says to Kavrin, "I have seen many people in pain, and the one thing they have in common is that it is very difficult for them to consider what is going on around them, because pain in the body or suffering in the soul invariably pulls the mind to itself. It is when we are not in pain that we are able to see clearly outside of ourselves. We are all in pain. Some may hide it, others may broadcast it to everyone who will listen and become enraged at those who don't. For some, the pain is obvious, for others it is subtle. Whether you're poor or rich, happy or sad or angry, regardless of all those popular demographic descriptors we use to divide ourselves, we all have it. Indeed, if wealth and fame equaled happiness, then we wouldn't be seeing massive drug use and suicides amid all the Hollywood greats. We're all selfish. People have always measured each other, and these days, society seems to measure ourselves based upon our pain. Our suffering has become a competition where value is determined by the intensity of our suffering. So we wallow in our misery and our suffering and turn this pain, whatever the source, into a poison that we spread to as many others as we can. Because pain is inward looking and selfish, but not the pain of the last stand. That pain is love. It is sacrifice. It is giving up yourself for others, not broadcasting and bringing others to wallow in our own misery. For this reason, I think the nihilistic bent of storytelling these days is the wrong path to take. Such tales where death is as random and arbitrary and meaningless as the lives of the characters who lose them only serve to perpetuate this delusion of devaluation. After all, if death, a fate for us all, can never have meaning, can life have meaning? Can anything? Such an attitude leads us only to greed, selfishness, and self-obsession. It turns us inward to sup upon that pain, devouring hope, destroying love, annihilating kindness. In contrast, tales of hope remind us that people matter, all people. We matter both in how we live and in how we die. There is purpose and there is value. Such an attitude fosters love, hope, and joy. It is in the sacrificial death, the epic last stand, where we see this all most clearly. So in conclusion, we've looked at that yearning for the epic that exists in all of us. And then we transition to look at the specific flavor of that epic nature, which is the sacrificial death. And finally, we've concluded with an appeal not towards nihilism, but towards hope, and how this yearning speaks to that need for hope. In this, I would encourage a rejection of nihilism and the modern obsession with death and futility. Instead, embrace stories of hope that uplift and encourage and embolden. Some would say this is a departure from realism, but I disagree. It is a refusal to accept the modern interpretation that life holds no meaning. Just because the world is filled with evil doesn't mean we have to become one with it or surrender to it. And so we come to the end of this video. If you have any thoughts, please share them in the comments below. I always appreciate a thumbs up on these views as well. And if you're interested in more of what I have to say, you can subscribe to this channel or sign up for my Substack. Thank you and have a good day.